RMDs are the biggest cause of work loss in Europe, and in EULAR we are utterly committed to positively influencing the policies that affect the rights of people with RMDs in the workplace.
3/4 of people with rheumatoid are diagnosed when of working age. One of the things that you may be worrying about whilst the doctor is talking to you about methotrexate and various other things, in your head you're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do about my job?
A person with RMDs can efficiently work and be happy and satisfied if also from the employer side there is understanding, there is flexibility, and there is the opportunity to really tailor the workplace.
I feel more needed and appreciated by other people, like that they appreciate what I'm doing.
Working itself can actually be one of the different aspects of a good quality of life.
RMDs are the biggest cause of work loss in Europe. EULAR is utterly committed to influencing the policy that shapes the lives of people with rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases. Now, the consequences of chronic disease, and especially the rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases, are utterly debilitating. And I hope you, like me, will feel that inclusion of people so affected is absolutely vital for society. So please join myself and EULAR on YouTube to help us work together to fight against these terrible and debilitating disorders.
When I was diagnosed, I didn't know what it meant having a chronic disease. I didn't have any information about lupus, and I didn't know what to do. Basically, I felt like my life ended. It took me a long time to get back to real life, to my friends, even to open up with my family. The most difficult part for me actually was when I was away at home sick and somebody had to step in and substitute me at work. That was the most difficult part for me. I suppose it's for everybody. You don't want to tell people that you are not feeling yourself or you are not feeling 100% because you are responsible for your job. However, sometimes you are just not able to hide it.
Very often I feel stressed in my working environment because I feel the urge of hiding my pain in order not to leave things behind in my work.
The biggest obstacles that I had was actually the timing and the strict time schedule that I needed to be in school. I was a teacher at that time, and of course I had my personal schedule, and in the mornings, for instance, I had some difficult times, or in the afternoon when I had less energy, it was really difficult for me to be there at those specific times. It would have been nice to have some flexibility.
The biggest obstacle that I have faced at my workplace is the accessibility issues. And I must say that I still strive for many things in order to have a fully accessible workplace environment. But the problem facing at my work is that sometimes they don't invest and sometimes also is the regulations in the government that is not so easy to invest in such things. And this is one of the problems that we face. Maybe they understanding the problems, maybe they understanding the obstacles that I face with my condition, but they don't reflect this in the investment of improvement of the workplace accessibility.
And we mustn't forget that health professionals are also human, and many of us also live with long-term diseases. And that also means that there has been extra challenges, discussions, and risks and stress that many health professionals have met during this time.
One of the biggest obstacles that I've faced is the invisible nature of my RMD. Because you can't necessarily see the symptoms, you can't see the pain that I go through and all the other symptoms that I experience, that can often be really difficult for employers and colleagues to understand. The variable nature of the condition. One day I could be great, the next day I could be laid up in bed. People like me try and persevere through our symptoms to try and prove our worth, and that can be quite difficult for us and for also other people to understand.
I think that it's certainly made clear that working is not the same for every person, and that some people, especially people with chronic conditions, may have specific problems when they must be present at the workplace or commute to and from work. It should also be considered that when they work from home, they may need specific adaptations to their working environment, which must be discussed with the employer. Current pandemic made it clear that not every employee can be treated in the same way, and that some employees with a chronic condition like an RMD may need specific attention.
The people bring additional value to the workplace, and maybe they're even more responsible in fulfilling their tasks.
When I'm not feeling well and have a bad day, which is very common for people with RMDs, for example, when I have brain fog or fatigue, I just ask my employer if it's possible to work from home, and he's fine with that.
No condition should be a barrier for people being able to achieve what they want to achieve, and that's certainly something which I've pushed for. But ultimately, we need to make universities, other education providers and employers accountable. And I really feel strongly that we shouldn't be making people with health conditions, people with RMDs, fit into an ableist-driven world. Why should people with health conditions have to fit in with a world that's been designed by people who are able-bodied and healthy? You know, work and education should be accessible to everybody, and that's something that we all need to push together. The pandemic has shed some light on just an insight into what it's like to live with an RMD, the isolation, the anxiety. Those are things which we all live with, people with RMDs live with. And I think that, you know, the wider society has been able to get a glimpse into that.
To be able to work, it means the most for me, because I feel fully integrated and member of the society. And it's one of the most important, I think, pillar of the good quality of life, and gives me satisfaction and self-esteem, and of course also support my psychological status, which is a very positive, or has a very positive effect to the good prognosis of my disease.
I think that people with rheumatic diseases constitute a very important proportion of the workforce, and it's very important to keep them working. And so I think that having attention for the specific challenges they face could be very helpful. Working is not only important from the societal perspective, and the financial and economic point of view, but also for people, their self-esteem, your overall quality of life. Working is an essential element of the lives of people. So it must, by all means, be avoided that they lose their job, especially in these times.
RMDs are the biggest cause of work loss in Europe, and in EULAR we are utterly committed to positively influencing the policies that affect the rights of people with RMDs in the workplace.
3/4 of people with rheumatoid are diagnosed when of working age. One of the things that you may be worrying about whilst the doctor is talking to you about methotrexate and various other things, in your head, you're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do about my job?
A person with RMDs can efficiently work and be happy and satisfied if also from the employer side there is understanding, there is flexibility, and there is the opportunity to really tailor the workplace.
I feel more needed and appreciated by other people, like that they appreciate what I'm doing.
Working itself can actually be one of the different aspects of a good quality of life.
Hello, thanks for joining us wherever you are watching from. It is World Arthritis Day, so a really good time to talk about the fact that in Europe, around 100 million people are living with arthritis of some sort. It is the biggest form of sick leave and early retirement in Europe. It's a really big issue, but you know, we don't really talk about it that much. Many people, in fact, hide it from their employers because the workplace is already precarious enough. And then, of course, with COVID-19, the situation is even worse. People feel even more vulnerable. So what we want to talk about today is the challenges in the workplace of people, for people living with RMDs. And of course, what are the solutions? And some of the solutions are really quite simple and practical. But we also want to look at European level and see how EU policy can actually do more and really take a leading role. So obviously we want to hear from you. We want you to ask questions of any of our speakers on Twitter, hashtag EULAR 2020 forum, or you can just make comments, you can start a conversation. That's what we want to do, we want to talk. So my first guest, let me introduce first of all, the president of EULAR, Professor Iain McInnes. He's a leading figure in arthritis research. A lot of you will know him, I'm sure. He's the vice principal and head of College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences at the University of Glasgow. Iain, great to see you.
Oh, Cathy, it's wonderful to be here.
So first of all, I use this term RMDs. Now, a lot of people will know what we mean by that. Lots of people might not. What do we mean by it?
Well, of course, everyone's familiar with the word arthritis, Cathy. And in fact, what most people are not familiar with is that catch-all. There are, in fact, more than 200 different medical conditions contained in that single word arthritis. And we prefer, for that reason, to term them the rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. They're a group of conditions that can arise right across the age spectrum. How often have you heard people talking about rheumatism in old people? Well, of course, that's such an old idea. And now in the 21st century, we're finally coming to recognize that these are a really serious cause of disability right across the age spectrum. And of course, with that realization, right across the spectrum of people who should be contributing in the workplace.
So when you talk about disability, what sort of range and degree of disability are we talking about?
Well, these conditions, first and foremost, as the name suggests, involve the joints, involve the muscle, they involve movement. They're associated with pain, with fatigue. But what's much less obvious to those who are not afflicted is that they are also likely to lead to difficulty concentrating, difficulty pursuing one's objectives. One can be present but not really there. One can be absent due to illness. And of course, the conditions go well beyond the joints. They can affect the heart, the lungs, the kidney, the brain. Really a very serious collection of disorders which belies their almost unknown status in wider society.
So obviously then a big issue in the workplace, because that's really what we want to talk about today. I mean, a big issue in the best of times, as we say, and these are the worst of times, COVID, the recession that's likely to follow. How difficult is it for anybody living with these conditions, particularly at the moment?
Well, in the first place, we've known for many, many years that access to the workplace, and once you're there, staying in the workplace is much more difficult for people with rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases. We are recognizing the terrible loss to our economy, the terrible loss to these individuals and to their families that is imposed as a result of that. And the problems are, first of all, if you're unwell, you can't get to work. That's fairly straightforward. But even if you're at work and you're struggling with pain, with disability, perhaps you're taking medicines that are difficult to take or have their own side effect profile, perhaps you're not feeling particularly good that day, but it's not very obvious that this is a bad day. All of those impose on your ability to contribute in the workplace and beyond.
So we're talking today about lots of solutions, we hope, but also the role that the EU can play. How important do you think that it is that the European Union takes a leading role in this? I mean, obviously, we know at European level, health is not one of the main competencies, but it still could be an important factor in the work done from Brussels.
Cathy, it's absolutely crucial. And for so many reasons. Well, first of all, for that general level of recognition at the transnational, across many countries, that the RMDs are diseases that really matter in this age, in this decade to come. But also because the EU sets a standard that other national governments must follow. And so by setting policy at the EU level, so we hope there will be national application of those rules, regulations, and processes that will make life so much easier for those who are afflicted by rheumatic musculoskeletal disease.
Well, stay there, Iain, because I'm going to come back to you in a moment. But I hope we're going to be joined now by Roberta Metsola, who is a Maltese Euro MP, of course, the chair of the European Parliament Interest Group on RMDs. Welcome to you. Wonderful to see you. I don't know if you're in sunny Malta or actually Brussels is quite sunny as well today. Are you in Brussels or Malta?
Yeah. I'm in the European Parliament and I'm trying to shield, myself from a very glaring sun. Quite rare, so I'm not complaining.
It is rare. So look, just give us a sense then, Roberta, of how important an issue you consider this to be.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this really interesting discussion. I'd like to thank EULAR for all the hard work in organizing today's online forum. It's an organization I have worked with for many years, since I'm, as you said, the chair of the European Parliament's interest group on RMDs, something that I got involved with immediately as soon as I got elected a little bit over 6 years ago now. Just to give you a little bit of a feel of what the interest group does, we consider it to be instrumental here in raising awareness on, as we've just heard, the enormous impact of what is so often neglected series of chronic diseases and the mark that these diseases leave on millions of EU citizens, but also on the economy and on the sustainability of health and social care systems. As I'm sure we will also hear, we're talking about RMDs. They are among the most common disorders that people face, and they contribute ultimately to the deterioration of the quality of life, of psychological strain, and even premature death of those suffering from RMDs. So needless to say, I believe that it is my obligation to do my best to protect the lives of the European citizens that I represent, and it is for this reason that I've really taken a keen interest in the work being done.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think that on a policy level, this has been a rather neglected area? Because I mean, as Iain was saying before, that this tended to be this thought that this is something that affects old people and maybe is being sort of just put to one side. We have a cancer policy at EU level, we have other non-communicable diseases have policies, but not for this. And do you think it has been neglected?
Yes, I think you are right. We sometimes see a lot of focus being placed on other areas, which of course should be placed, but you feel that there is a lack of attention that is placed on diseases, a series of diseases that affect so many people, but so few people either talk about it or think that you can have action on it. So as you said, you sort of get doors closed because they say health is a member state competence, but then you still spend a lot of time discussing other diseases, other conditions. So we are quite a growing number of MEPs who have said, look, it's time that we put this on the map. If I take my country, and we have a very strong national member in this forum, and we're talking about 12% of the entire population, 60,000 people out of a population of just 500,000. That's such a big amount, and it is a pity that we have not done enough so far.
Now, the European Commission is just in the process of sort of reworking its disability strategy. So this would be a prime moment, would it, to actually get this further onto the EU agenda? I mean, what more could be done, do you think, at EU level, and how could you use the disability strategy to enable that?
Well, first of all, we wanted our interest group to be so-called upgraded to an intergroup, which means that it would be given the adequate resources in the European Parliament, like other intergroups have been given. So we're waiting also for the midterms, which means in a year's time, when we're in the middle of our mandate, to try to do that once again with the support that we will get, definitely from my political group, but I have no doubt that also from the other political groups. At this stage also, that would increase the level of interest that you have in the European Parliament, which we can then see as a way to put pressure on the European Commission. This has been a year when, of course, justifiably so, the focus has been on the pandemic, but that also does not mean that we will spend all our resources on that. We cannot let such important conditions, such important policy areas be put on the side. And this is where, as you said, the disability strategy comes in. It is a flagship strategy of the current European Commission, which is still, so to speak, at the beginning of its mandate, because so much work has been pushed back because of the pandemic. So this also gives us the time to make sure that we put RMDs as the center of its focus in order for it not to be, as I said before, put to the side.
But what specifically could be done, though? I mean, is it creating deadlines and goals, leading national policies? What can actually be done? What can change?
Well, what we usually work on in areas where member states have competence is not to just stay out of the policy area. So what we would do is create what we could call roadmaps in order to identify best practices in different member states. You have some member states that are years ahead of other member states in the way they tackle RMDs, in the way their policy, national health priorities give attention to it, in the way campaigns are done in order not to stigmatize people who suffer from these conditions at the place of work, in order, for example, to make sure from an insurance point of view or from a social policy point of view that you are not either stigmatized but also not prevented from working on being present at the workplace. Of course, this is another issue, that a new angle that we've seen this year is that whereas before people with RMDs would need to justify why they need to work from home or not be able to be as mobile as their colleagues, this year, and with the new ways of working, this could help even more people stay in the area of work because we have a better teleworking practice. Another thing we could do is a list of recommendations based on such best practices, which could bring national health authorities and campaigns together.
And the fact that you talk about home working and flexible working because of COVID, I mean, that's been one of the plus things, but it shows, doesn't it, that things can change and change quite quickly, and can really provide some sort of blueprint for the future potentially.
Yes, and we are still learning from that, new ways of working, and what we are saying and using not only the European Parliament, but also what is being done, for example, by national governments that are under a lot of pressure in order to place, to grant the best amount of teleworking possibilities to all their employees, public servants. So we are also arguing, give incentives to the private sector in order also, if you look at the traffic congestion, the environmental impact, the amount of space you need to dedicate for car parks in central areas of town, but also in making sure that you give the possibility of people not to feel like their only way to get the job that they've studied for or they want to keep by having it in big, large urban areas. So we have seen a lot of effort being put in other policy areas. Why not extrapolate them and put them in order to tackle health problems of a physical nature that so many people in our society suffer from? And that would also encourage and what was said before in the introductory remarks, that this is not a disease. There's not a series of diseases that impact older people. This is, you see people, and I've had cases being presented to me, such as, for example, somebody who suffers from psoriasis, and that has led to a debilitating 6 years of his life before he identified and understood, and this is in Malta, how to live with the condition and how to promote it in order to say, look, we can look at this not only as in that case a dermatology problem, but basically with an interdepartmental coming together of health professionals and them working together in order to target people and patients who suffer from these kind of diseases.
And I know you have to leave us soon, but just, I mean, very importantly, the human cost is one very important part of this, but the economic side of it is giant, isn't it? I mean, I was saying earlier that it's the biggest cause of sick leave and premature retirement in Europe. But you think about the costs involved, surely that's enough certainly to sway policy on some level.
Absolutely, and this is something we dealt with last parliamentary mandate, where we tried to cost the impact economically of people who are either, as you said, off sick at work, or who people need to be retrained, or new people need to be recruited because there was no willingness to keep a person with these conditions still on the workplace, or also, as I said before, the stigmatization that comes with younger people having such conditions, but then also beyond the immediate economic impact of them not being on the workplace, it's the social economic impact of them having to stay home and being effectively marginalized from society. The long-term impact of that, and also that's where we got, for example, local politicians or councils on board in order to identify members in the community who are basically stuck at home because they suffer from these conditions, who have no access to community programs because they are young, who nobody they fall off the radar because they're not known about. So there you also have a social impact of people who are not able to be active members of their society because of these conditions. And if you cost that as well, the number is much higher than we had originally even thought of or calculated.
Well, Roberta Metsola, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure that your remarks are very welcome to people working in this field. And thank you very much indeed. We're going to magic you off the screen now. And I'm going to go back and talk to Iain and ask Iain, what's your reactions then to some of the comments that you've just heard?
Well, first of all, I want to say a really warm word of thanks to Roberta and indeed to her colleagues in Parliament who've taken such a keen interest in helping us to support people who have the rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. She's been a tremendous force for good, and her remarks are taken very well. Just some of these numbers, Cathy, are pretty mind-boggling. Something in the order of 160 billion euros when you actually look at the number, that total cost of work-related RMDs, something in the order of 2% of GDP in countries across Europe. And for us to hear Roberta talking in such positive tone about taking that message into policy is enormously welcome. And possibly worth also pointing out that EULAR itself set in our own strategy by 2023, making substantial impact in the participation contribution of people with RMDs in the workplace. That's how important it is to us in EULAR, and to see that reflected in the political classes is enormously encouraging.
So when we touched upon COVID before, I mean, obviously there are the positives of the working at home, the flexible working, but do you really worry that this is going to make a big difference to people, that for the good and the bad, there are two sides to this coin?
Well, of course, I'm Scottish, so my cup is always half full, Cathy. If you live in the slightly damper northern parts of Europe, one becomes very used to looking at the positives. And of course, there are positives coming from COVID, but equally, we would be utterly naive if we didn't recognize that this has been the single biggest health shock to our collective lives in, I guess, nearly a century. And that has been particularly sorely felt in the patient body, people with rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. Many of these people have immune systems that do not work as well as we would like. Many of these people, in order to maintain a quality of life, are required to take medicines that change the way in which the immune system functions. And that has led inevitably to enormous anxieties on the part of people with RMDs. Will I, first of all, stay safe? Or am I vulnerable? Do I require to shield? Am I able to participate in the workplace? If I'm shielding, I can't. Am I at greater disadvantage? And so we see a real risk in the COVID era that as the system is tested, and by the system, I mean the entirety of the healthcare, social care, and working environment, as it is tested in a way that we've rarely seen it tested by a global pandemic. Will it be people with RMDs who are likely to suffer? Is it easier for them as individuals to be singled out? Well, you know, they don't maybe contribute as much. Maybe they're unable to contribute as well. And we in EULAR feel very strongly indeed that that is an unacceptable development in the time of COVID. And we speak very strongly as their advocates, as indeed do people with RMDs themselves.
Now, there are lots of different areas where different policy could make a difference, either national or European. And I know that you're not a policy specialist, but what do you need most? What really would make a difference?
Well, I think we in the organization are looking for practical help. Ergonomic workplace design, that costs money, but delivers to individual companies and at the wider level enormously, because these incredibly creative people who are currently excluded, if you like, left out of the workplace, can start to contribute. And so ergonomic design, other practicalities, the provision of adequate digital means, appropriate Wi-Fi, appropriate hardware that allows us to take advantage of this incredible digital revolution through which we are living, and the acceleration that the COVID pandemic has required in this digital revolution. Who would have thought, Cathy, that you and I would be making a broadcast through this digital means even just a few months ago, that we could have brought people together from all across Europe to have that conversation. But also we are looking for bigger picture issues. We need investment in research into the rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. I am both clinician but also investigator. It is critical that we understand why these diseases occur. How best can they be treated? And once being treated, we require security of the medicines supply. One of the tragedies of the COVID era was a diminution of the supply of essential medicines, which, for example, hydroxychloroquine was a very interesting example, a medicine which works very well in the treatment of some RMDs and has been shown not to work very well in the context of COVID. And yet, for a time, the COVID pandemic led to real challenges in drug supply. And finally, and then practical issues, and forgive me, but the final piece here is actually cultural, Cathy. It's creating policy that reflects a society that is inclusive, a society that believes that all members of our community should have the right and the capability and wherewithal to deliver as they can with all the creativity and energy that they have to bring.
And so then just finally, Iain, I mean, if you're looking ahead, well, let's post-COVID, we all want to have our glass half full there and get beyond it. But, you know, even further ahead, we say this is not a disease of just old people, but we do have an aging society, so it is an issue. I mean, what are we storing up if we don't deal with this now? How worried are you about the future if this issue is not really properly tackled?
I'm enormously worried about the future. We've emphasized that RMDs affect all of the age groups, but you correctly point out, Cathy, that we live in an aging population. We estimate that there will be in the order of 150 million people living with severe disability as a result of osteoarthritis in just a few years' time. These are people who will require medical care, but also who will require social care, who will take their own family's time and lose that essential individualism, which is what makes us as people. And so grappling with these challenges now, investing in the research agenda, investing in the inclusive and positive cultural change that we hope policy will bring, will create an environment for the future that will make RMDs no longer hidden, but absolutely visible in the sight of both the medical and, much more importantly, general society.
Well, Iain, thank you very much for now. I know you're going to join us a little bit later on in our second panel, but that's sort of set the scene. We know what we're talking about. We know the issues. So that's great. Thank you. We would like you also to participate in a Slido poll, and we're going to get that onto screen at the moment, I hope. This is the question that we're going to ask. How can the EU best support Europeans living with RMDs to access and remain in work? If you scan the QR code on the screen now, you will be able to go through to the actual options that you can vote. So it might be updating the EU disability strategy. We've also already referred to that. It might be encouraging EU member states to develop comprehensive strategies. It might be ensuring the EU funds programs, possibly through the COVID recovery plan, to support research into the treatment and prevention of RMDs, or it might be all of the above. So those are the options. We want you to take part in this poll, and you can scan the QR code, or in fact, underneath the video that you're watching now, you'll see it says show more. If you click on that, it will then link through and you'll be able to go to the EULAR website where you can also participate in the poll. We won't actually be doing the answers for another 30 minutes or so, so there's not too much of a rush. You're okay, but we want you to vote. We want to hear your thoughts on this. So before the first panel, we're going to hear some voices now from people living and working with RMDs, just to get a sense of some of the issues that people are having to deal with. So let's take a look at that.
When I was diagnosed, I didn't know what it meant having a chronic disease. I didn't have any information about lupus, and I didn't know what to do. Basically, I felt like my life ended.
Very often I feel stressed in my working environment because I feel the urge of hiding my pain in order not to leave things behind in my work.
In the mornings, for instance, I had some difficult times, or in the afternoon when I had less energy, it was really difficult for me to be there at those specific times. It would have been nice to have some flexibility.
Many of us also live with long-term diseases, and that also means that there has been extra challenges, discussions, and risks and stress that many health professionals have met during this time.
One of the biggest obstacles that I've faced is the invisible nature of my RMD. Because you can't necessarily see the symptoms, you can't see the pain that I go through and all the other symptoms that I experience, that can often be really difficult for employers and colleagues to understand the variable nature of the condition.
When I have brain fog or fatigue, I just ask my employer if it's possible to work from home, and he's fine with that.
To be able to work, it means the most for me because I feel fully integrated and member of the society. And it's one of the most important, I think, pillar of the good quality of life.
Working is not only important from the societal perspective and the financial and economic point of view, but also for people, their self-esteem, your overall quality of life. Working is an essential element of the lives of people.
very interesting when you hear somebody talking like that, saying this about the invisible nature of this disease and that people can't see the symptoms and the frustrations of that. So we're now moving into our first panel. We're going to look at the challenges for people living with RMDs. We've already heard some in that video. The challenges to find jobs, to stay in work, and to return to work in the COVID-19 recession. It's a tough world out there. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can tweet. It's hashtag EULAR 2020 forum. So you can send us questions via Twitter. So let me introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Peter Boyd, who is a EULAR patient advocate. You're working with people with arthritis and rheumatism in Europe, Peter, and you're also a services support officer with Arthritis Ireland. So you're in Dublin. Hello to you.
Hello, how are you? Yeah.
Fine. I love to have a nice Irish accent there. Sarah Copsey is Project Manager, Prevention and Research Unit of EU OSHA, which is, of course, the European Agency for Health and Safety at Work. So, Sarah, where are you? In Bilbao?
I'm in Bilbao, yes.
I love the fact that we're all over Europe like this. I mean, it is one of the beauties of doing this. Okay, we can't see each other, but we can get that geographical spread. It's nice. Dr. Johanna Kalhoff is an epidemiologist from the German Rheumatism Research Center based in Berlin. Hello to you.
Hello.
Great to see you. And Professor Olivia Wu is the William R. Lindsay Chair of Health Economics from the University of Glasgow. Hello, Olivia.
Hi, Cathy.
So you're going to give a different perspective, but a very interesting one. So Peter, let me start with you first of all, because I know that you suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. You were diagnosed in your 20s when you were working in the hospitality industry, working in bars, also I think a personal trainer. Not jobs that really lend themselves to somebody who is diagnosed like that. It must have been very tough. Were you given much support?
Yeah, there were very physical jobs and very active jobs, and I suppose my bosses in the bar, they really did their best to try and keep me on in work, but it's not exactly something that you can be reassigned and work at a different desk and carry on with your activities. So despite their best efforts, I was forced out of that work. And, you know, it's something that a lot of people diagnosed and living with rheumatoid arthritis have to encounter is leaving work or having to find something different to do. And I was no different. The difficulty I found was in a number of years later, when I was ready to re-enter the workforce, that I found that it was very, very difficult to find those supports that I needed at that stage to be able to re-enter the workforce. And I suppose that's what encouraged me to really get set up and really find a way of managing that and advocating on behalf of people who are looking to stay in employment and return to employment after they've been diagnosed with an RMD.
Because, I mean, as well as the huge physical challenges, there are mental challenges, aren't there? It's all about the self-esteem, about the business of your life and your work.
Well, there wasn't an aspect of my life that wasn't affected and impacted when I was diagnosed. And I really defined myself as a barman, as somebody who was gregarious and outgoing and welcoming to people. And that's how I saw myself. And I kind of played that character almost. And when everything began to be stripped away, everything went with it, from financial security, but also the psychosocial impacts. And I've no problem and difficulty in saying anything to anyone about the depression that I lived with, and I still do have to manage each day. And that's the real difficulty and isolation that I felt, and that kind of difficulty returned this year, I found, with the impact of COVID-19. And that's something that people living with RMDs this year have really had to try and find a way to manage as well. And that's going to be
you've been working, I find, sorry to interrupt, I think you've been working on a COVID helpline, haven't you, with Arthritis Ireland? So what sort of challenges have people been reporting to you?
Well, the big thing is that I've been managing the helpline. People have been calling in with all sorts of difficulties. They've been working on the front line. So we've had healthcare workers who are taking immune suppressant medication, unsure about whether they can continue in work. There are others who are returning to education later on in the summer. They may have been teachers or parents of children going back to school and things like that. And there's a real anxiety. There was a real fear. There was real sense of desperation almost about that. But that was just one element. There was also the elements around medication, about not accessing appointments. We've just published a survey today to coincide with World Arthritis Day with Arthritis Ireland, and 44% of people that responded had appointments cancelled over the lockdown period. So they weren't able to get their ongoing treatments, they weren't able to get repeat prescriptions. So all that built up a sense of isolation, anxiety, and real fear about what COVID-19 was going to impact not only on their condition, but their ability to continue in work.
Okay, well, let me bring Sarah Copsey in now. Sarah, the discrimination in the workplace, anxiety, fear, people perhaps not telling their employers that they have a condition. Is this all a familiar thing to you?
Yeah, this is very, very familiar. And the truth is that workplaces can't make accommodations. They can't help those with rheumatic and musculoskeletal conditions if they don't know what the issue is. But if you don't have a workplace where there's open communication, where all workers are valued and workers' skills and expertise are valued, and there's been some training and support in how to have that kind of open communication with the employer, so that often very simple measures can be taken to allow the person to continue in working. And if you have the opposite situation where people are afraid to speak up, are worried that they're going to lose their jobs if they say something, they won't. It means you lose the opportunity to intervene in time. And because we know that the quicker and sooner a musculoskeletal disorder is attended to, or the quicker something done so work doesn't make your condition worse, the better it's going to be for the person, and often it's going to be simpler, cheaper, and less expensive to do so.
But I mean, we are tending to assume that with the COVID, that because people can work from home, that they will be in a better position. But is that necessarily the case? I mean, I presume that we're all becoming more sedentary because we're at home. We're not necessarily sitting on the right chairs, you know, doing the right thing ourselves.
Well, we know that having access to teleworking can be really, really helpful to people with RMDs to be able to manage their condition, work from home, manage doctor's appointments and other things, but it's got to be done in the right conditions. So if you don't have good ergonomic working conditions at home, if you find you're suddenly under pressure to actually be working longer hours from home and not get up and take your breaks and stretch, and if at the same time you're feeling stressed, isolated, and worried about the future at the same time, will you be able to get back to work? What will it, as others have said, what will it mean when you have to return to the office, and will it be safe for you? Then it's not going to be good teleworking. But on the other hand, many employers now have realized that teleworking is possible, is practical. So maybe there's going to be more opportunities to offer it to those who need it in the future. In fact, in my own case, I have a back condition, and I found it more comfortable teleworking because.
Well, sorry to interrupt. I know that your organisation is launching a new campaign today, in fact, but we will talk about that in a moment because it's really important. It's called Healthy Workplaces Lighten the Load. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But let me just move to Johanna Kalhoff from Berlin. You're an epidemiologist, and you actually have got lots of good data on RMDs in Germany, which is sort of heartening, I suppose, in the sense that it shows that somewhere along the line it has been taken seriously. But how useful is that? What sort of data have you got, and how is it being used?
First of all, to also see the positive side of things, we got data from the German National Arthritis Centers, and we collect those data since 1993, which is pretty amazing, I think. And in those data, we see that the proportion of employed patients with RMDs has risen steadily in Germany, which is a really good thing. For example, compared to 1998, we have 60% of women and 69% of men working now, and that proportion was much lower in 1998. So the percentages have really risen, and also among the patients with more than 10 years disease duration, the numbers of patients getting disability pension are now only 23%, and that was 40% in 1998. So that's also much better now.
And was that because there was more of an open culture, that more of an understanding culture, the fact that those numbers went up?
I think this is mostly in 1998, treatment with biologics was not available yet. So we have much better treatment options now. But to not only see the positive things, I think a major issue we see in Germany and also in all European countries, it's that these numbers could be even better, because the data collection from which I got those percentages, that's specialized arthritis centers. But there's many patients in Germany and also in Europe who don't have access to rheumatologists. And early treatment is so important because in rheumatoid arthritis, we got this window of opportunity. That's the first 12 weeks after the onset of the disease. And if patients are not being treated in this window of opportunity, it has long-lasting effects on their disability and also on their ability to work. And
so it's one thing having the data, but you'll be able to use the data properly. I mean, clearly you're saying that there are health inequalities out there, and that even though the information might be there, it's still not really feeding into as good treatment as it could be anyway.
Yeah, but I think it's tremendously important to collect the data, because if we don't have that, we don't know in which ways we have to improve things. So if there's no data, we can't inform the policymakers that there are really open tasks to do. So yeah, I think from some European countries, there's nearly no data at all on these topics. But it's so important to see those gaps. And
so that's certainly something that could be recommended at European level, to get better data collection as a starting point to then be able to build policy from that.
Definitely, yes.
So thank you very much. And Olivia Wu, let me bring you in as a health economist, because we've already talked a little bit about the cost of sick leave, early retirement, losing all these people. What is the economic impact? Is it measurable?
So we've already heard that the economic impact is immense, and we heard figures such as 160 billion euros, and that is that is just how this is just based on data that we have that are not always perfect. So there tends to be a slight underestimation of the actual impact from an economic perspective. But I think it is really important. We have made a lot of progress in measuring the burden and the impact of RMDs, taking into account the cost of medical treatment, the cost associated with people losing their workability, loss of productivity, and so on. But what we also should now think about is to collect better data, as Johanna has said, but actually to try and measure the potential benefits of having really good policies and interventions and articulate that. Because I think it's really important to articulate the value proposition for the employers. During this COVID era, employers themselves are under a lot of pressure, and we do not want them to consider introducing ergonomic interventions or adhering to policies to keep their workers at work is going to be a financial burden. We want to be able to express to them that investment in these areas would potentially give them gains. And so the way that we're measuring all these things, I think we need to take the step further by thinking beyond the burden, but also what they look like as potential benefits.
But do you think in general, it is the economic argument that is going to be the argument that will make the difference to employers? Is it money one way or another that is the greatest influencer?
So I think we need to ask our employers, what is the value proposition that will allow them to make this investment? We do that with drug treatments. We have a very clear framework in terms of what is value for money, what is the additional cost we're willing to pay for additional health benefits. And so from an employer's perspective, what is it? I mean, it could be return of investment, which is simply in economic terms, but we could also think about a social return of investment by actually monetizing the social benefits as well, not just thinking about the return of investment associated with reducing the days off work by their employees. So there are many different ways of measuring it and expressing it. But I think we need to understand what is important to employers, what do they value, so that we can collect the right information and make the case for it.
Peter, you're nodding. Thank you, Olivia. You're nodding. What's your view on that? How do you convince employers?
Well, the one thing I've always said, and since I started advocating, was that it's more beneficial to keep people in employment and get them back to work than to be paying them out for social welfare or payments like that. It's always more beneficial to keep people in their employment or like I say, get them back. And I find that, you know, the one thing I miss from really miss from working from home is that team spirit and that kind of even if it's just like making a cup of coffee or it's having that conversation over at the printer or whatever it may be. It's the real isolation that you find of working from home is a real difficulty. And if you imagine that you may have children or you have the housework and you've no separation between your work and your home life, and you don't really switch off, all that is doing is building on the stress and the difficulties that you're encountering. And when we consider like the three biggest comorbidities with RMDs, back pain, stress, and depression, you're going to have all of those things building up if you're particularly when you're working at home and you're trying to balance all these things out. As Sarah said, we mightn't have the best ergonomic solution or the best setup for our home office, so we're going to be causing more pain for ourselves, making things worse. We can't get appointments, we can't get to see the people who are trying to make it better for us, and then we also have the stress and anxieties that brings, and that will inevitably lead towards depression, where we're anxious and we're worried about what's the future for ourselves and our families. So we need it to be an encouragement to get back to work and to stay in work.
Absolutely. Sarah, let me bring you in here, because tell us more about this Lighten the Load campaign that's being launched today. I mean, who are you talking to? Are you talking to employers, policymakers, workers themselves? Who are you talking to?
Our Healthy Workplace Lighten the Load campaign is basically an awareness raising campaign. So it's aimed at workplaces. But we want to get the message out to everybody. I mean, we want to get the message out to policymakers as well, that work-related musculoskeletal disorders are a huge burden, and that now is the time to act. We'll be emphasising the type of things that Olivia's mentioned, that failing to act is actually a huge burden on business itself, but also on healthcare systems, social systems. For workplaces, it's to do with underproductivity, recruitment and replacement, but also looking to the future. We've got an aging workforce, so there's going to be fewer young workers and more older workers, possibly with conditions. So employers have got to start thinking about making work sustainable for all their workers.
I mean, there's an interesting question coming here on Twitter from Claire Jacqueline. She says, people living with RMDs employed as teachers, nurses, police, supermarket, they can't work from home. Not everybody works in an office. So what can we do to help them? Who would like to come in on that? mean, Sarah, maybe I'll go back to you and then come to one to the others.
Well, I mean, it is very difficult. There's no easy answer. Yeah, it's got to be done on risk assessment and look carefully. And you need to involve the individual sector and the trade unions and the people involved to find practical ways forward to
Peter,
be
you
dealing
wanted
with
to come in.
Yeah, that was what I was saying earlier about being on the helpline this year with dealing with people. It's in an Irish context, but they are the people that were most afraid and most anxious about what COVID-19 and the impact it was going to have on their environments, because those who could work from home were encouraged to do so and were able to do so. But it was the ones on the front line, and they were then afraid of, do they continue with their medications and their treatments? Do they even start, for those who were newly diagnosed in 2020, do they even start on their treatments? And that conversation had to be had with their rheumatology team, with ourselves, and it was a very difficult conversation because they struggled to even get appointments and to see those health professionals. And that's what made this year such an anxious one for those frontline staff who had to go out into the community and had to continue in their jobs. And it's what's going to make it more and more difficult going into the following years, because a lot of them had to make that decision, and many of them, or some of them who spoke to me, I should say, were making the decision that they couldn't actually continue in those roles, and they were either having to take sick leave or they were leaving those roles behind.
Johanna, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I don't have a solution for the people who are not able to work at home. But I looked up some data from Germany, and this is not specific for people with rheumatic diseases, but for general German population. Only 11% of the people with low education were able to do home office, while 60% of people with high education were able to do home office. So this is a really big problem. This is not only a few persons.
So there are big sort of social divisions here.
Yeah, definitely.
Sarah, did you want to come in?
I was just going to quickly say that I said they're not always easy solutions, but it really is that underlies the importance for all workers to take all the proper measures that are required. That look into how social distancing to work in the workplace, and look at can people work in bubbles to reduce risk, etc. We've actually got a database on COVID-19 on our website with links to all sorts of different information from different sectors as well. So I'd invite people to look at that. But you have to sit down and think about it, and we're noticing now those industries who already had poorer health and safety in place are the ones, not good standards in place, are the ones that are seeing high numbers of problems with COVID as well. So you need good health and safety management, and then build measures for COVID into that as well.
So we're going to talk in terms of policy at EU level and to a certain extent national level in our next panel. What would you say is the most important thing that the policymakers get right then? I mean, do you have any thoughts, Olivia, on what needs to happen that really could make a difference? Because, we can talk and get conversations going, but really it's actions that are necessary to really change something. And, if there were one policy action, what would it be?
I think the policymakers need to keeping people with RMD at work an important health issue, as also in addition to economic issue. As Peter said, work is not only just a source of income, it forms part of somebody's identity, and it has impact on health quality of life and life expectancy. And there's already frameworks on how to trade off investments and benefits in medicine, but we need to extend this framework and take into account interventions that will allow people with RMD to continue to work. And I think this is what policymakers need to do. It is not it's not that much further than what they're already doing in prioritizing and investing in health treatments. It's just adopting a wider perspective to make sure that you take into account the perspectives of the people with RMDs and their families, because their families will be impacted as well, and the employers, the government and the society. It's important to have the voice of all the stakeholders so that we can articulate the benefits of investing in these interventions.
And do you see a role at European level for this? Because so many of these issues are dealt with at national level. Health generally has been seen as something that a national competence. But do you see that that the EU could really play a leading role here?
Yes, I think this is absolutely a good opportunity to pick this up, and at a European level. There is no reason why this should only be looked at a single country level, because this impacts people across different countries, and so that I think at a European level, and and also employers, businesses work across countries as well, across the European level. So it only makes sense to tackle this across countries at a European level.
So let me ask the others then, in terms of your real kind of policy wishes, if you had a magic wand. Peter, what do you think could really make a difference, particularly at European level, to take a lead? I mean, we're seeing that health actually is now starting to be a kind of even though there aren't major competences at European level, it has become a sort of a big issue. So maybe this is a time to strike and get voices heard.
Yeah, I think we need to insist on the implementation. I think that's the one thing we always talk about: policies and procedures and plans and everything like that. But it's important that we follow through into the next stage and get the implementation right. And if we're going to do anything, I think it's important that we've always talked about putting the patient at the center. So let's do that. What do we need? What do patients want and need? And that is timely access to the service, and the rheumatologist or the advanced nurse practitioners or the physiotherapy departments, and using them all as almost a triage service, so that we can get through. And because there's going to be so many lists, there's going to be so many backed up appointments after this year across Europe, that we have them streamlined so that we can get through those lists, and the people who need and are in the worst cases, who need that support, get that support. As has been mentioned many times, it's timely and it's early interventions is what's needed. And if that's going to set people back, what's happened this year, we need them to be now pushed back to the forefront, so that they can get the treatment they need. Those of us who have good management and stable management for a number of years, we can go with virtual clinics, and we can go with checking in and making sure everything is stable and under control. But those who need the appointments and to see people in person, they need to be prioritized and given that treatment first up. And using, as I say, the nurse practitioners, the physios, the different departments that are involved, and using them all so that we can work our way through those lists.
And Johanna, thank you. Johanna, what would your suggestion be to policymakers?
I would really love them to support monitoring of all those actions, because it is good to make policies, but it should also be monitored that there's progress being made. And I think the UMask net, it's also partly funded by EULAR and the European Union. It's a good step in that direction. But sometimes it's really hard to get long-term funding for projects like that. And that would be my wish.
Thank you. And Sarah, what about you? I mean, I know you've been working on this whole issue for many, many years. Do you find it frustrating, for instance, at EU level, there would be a cancer policy, but this is a sort of an area that's neglected? What do you want to happen at policy level?
We very much would like to see muscular skeletal disorders pushed up the health agenda, It's been consistently in the European strategies on occupational safety and health, tackling musculoskeletal disorders, tackling issues of the aging workforce, and building diversity to occupational safety and health. But one thing we know is that also you need a multidisciplinary approach to helping people return to work or stay in work. So employment services, health services, the employer and the individual and others working together. And that's also needed at the European level. So we need employment, occupational health coordinating well with European health strategy to make this the centre of attention and to act all together now on the issue.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for just setting out the stall, if you like, and getting a sense, particularly from you, Peter, you know, the difficulties of living with these conditions and some of the frustrations of campaigning as well. So thank you all very much indeed. We're going to move on to our next panel in a moment, where we are going to be looking at the whole EU policy area. Just a reminder, if you haven't already done so, to take part in the Slido poll. You can look underneath the picture that you're looking at now, and you can go through to the EULAR.org website. So you click on show more under the screen, and then you can get there and you can vote. But we will be showing the results of that in just a moment. But before our next panel, we're going to hear some more stories from people living and working with RMDs. Talking about the importance of work, we heard Peter talking about that. There's issues of self-esteem. So let's take a look.
I believe that people with RMDs can and want to work, and that they will make it happen.
And also just that understanding that I am more than my condition. And that I am a person that brings skills and experience to the job, and that's been really, really valuable to me, and I know that's not the same for everybody else.
For me personally, to be able to work means freedom, self-esteem and self-confidence.
Being able to have flexible working around hours that suit me has been really important, but also that option to be able to work from home, to have equipment that supports me to work effectively from home and also in the office.
The most important measures that can be taken in the workplace for people with RMDs are the flexibility and the trust. If the employer can show some flexibility to the employee, it's much easier for people with RMDs to really do the job and be at the workspace at the time that the energy is high, that you can really put 100% of yourself in your job. And of course, this needs a lot of trust, because the employer needs to open up and trust the employee, which is very important here. And I know it's not easy to do, but really the flexibility, I think it's a major thing, and it would make a lot of difference for people with RMDs.
I really think that health professionals have benefited from this time, from working flexible and doing things differently, especially when it comes to digital care. I think we will have a possibility here to improve access to care.
I certainly think that the COVID pandemic has made it clear that remote care is very feasible and a very good way of providing care. And it's also made clear that you don't need to have face-to-face contact for every consultation.
I am more than my condition. That was the quote that I took out of there. For people living in the RMDs, they all want to say that, I am more than my condition. Well, we're going to move into our second panel in a moment. Let me just tell you that we've got almost 900 people watching on YouTube. So I hope you all did take part in the Slido poll, because we are going to look at the results now. Remember the question we were asking: how can the EU best support Europeans living with RMDs to access and remain in work? Can we look at the results of the Slido poll now? Can we get it onto the screen? There we have it. I've got to open it up to be able to see it, because it's very little on my screen. Well, what a surprise. All of the above actions, everybody agreed with everything. Updating the EU disability strategy, encouraging EU member states to develop comprehensive strategies, and also, of course, funding for research into treatment and prevention. I think we kind of could guess that most people would agree with most of those things. But thank you very much indeed for taking part in that, because these are some things that we can now feed into our next discussion. And remember, if you want to ask any questions, we don't want 900 of you asking questions, but we could have a few. It's hashtag EULAR 2020 forum. And I want to introduce our two speakers for our next discussion. Dr. Jesus Alvarez is from the European Commission, and he's from DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Welcome to you. I know you're in Luxembourg. Good to see you. And Iain McInnes is back with us, the EULAR president. So welcome to you again. And I hope you've been enjoying hearing everybody's thoughts so far, because then we can pick up on some of those in our discussion now. So Jesus, give us a sense then, how much on the Commission radar is this whole issue of RMDs? Because we're talking about 100 million people in Europe. We're talking about huge amounts of money that it's costing employers. Surely it's got to be a big political issue.
Certainly. I'm very glad to be with you today, and thank you very much for inviting the Commission. First, I have to say that we give a lot of importance and a lot of priority to musculoskeletal disorders, certainly. There is indeed an European dimension on that. We have seen in the previous panel about discussing about the role of the EU. And it is obvious that the EU has a very, very powerful and crucial role, because health is much more than healthcare. Healthcare is for member states, but as you know very well, health is something multidimensional. And there are many aspects related to health that in which the EU role is crucial. For instance, occupational safety and health. This is about prevention. This is about not only preventing occupational diseases, preventing musculoskeletal disorders, for instance, but it's also about promoting good working conditions, because at the end of the day, that's essential. And there are many other aspects that are under the EU remit somehow. In the public health aspect, for instance, the epidemiological data or support to member states, or mental health in supporting member states. As you see, everything is interconnected, no? So definitely, in the particular case of musculoskeletal disorders, the Commission is fully aware of the importance, and we are working very hard.
Aware of the importance is one thing, but has much been done, and is more being planned? I mean, we heard, for instance, that in Germany there's data going back 30 years, but there isn't in that sort of data. Certainly isn't that sort of data across the whole of Europe. And if we're talking about playing a role of coordinating national policies, for instance, what more can actually be done in practical terms?
Yeah, actually, this is being done, and I'm sure that much more will be done in the future. Because, for instance, in the EU strategic framework on occupational safety and health, usually we say OSH, occupational safety and health. Many of you know that. In this framework, a lot of importance is given to prevention of diseases. In the past, it was mainly given to preventing accidents, which is very important. But now we realize that it's essential to give also priority to preventing diseases, in particular the more prevalent ones, as it is the case for musculoskeletal disorders. And a lot of actions have been taken, for instance, in promoting risk assessment. In the previous panel, our colleague Sarah from the OSHA, from the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work, has very well summarized the current campaign that is being launched today. And this is the result of the priority that has been allowed to this area, because it has been a very broad consensus in working together, in particular on that. Because on the legislative side, we have a lot of elements. We have the framework directive, the obligation to adapt the work to the worker, and not the other way around. So that's a big principle. We have legislation, or the directive on heavy loads or the directive on screens. So legislation is there. The challenging, the more challenging issue is the effective implementation and the awareness on
which
that.
is the point that has been made, the monitoring and the implementation.
Exactly.
So can you toughen that up?
With pleasure. Actually, we are working now in preparing the future EU OSHA strategy, because the current one is ending this year in 2020. So in this respect, we have one priority. The priority not only to protect, but to prevent and to be inclusive. Actually, our Directorate General is Employment, Social Affairs, and Inclusion. So inclusion is essential. It's not only a legal obligation, it's not only a moral obligation, it is also good business, as Professor Hu has very brilliantly mentioned. So we are determined to work in this area, and to work in this area with our stakeholders, because anything and everything has to be done in very good coordination with them. And in this inclusive spirit, we are preparing the next steps. And I don't know exactly when, but in the next future, in the forthcoming months probably, a public consultation is going to be launched on the main elements, and everybody will have the opportunity to put forward ideas and specific suggestions and initiatives.
Right. Well, then this is Iain McInnes's moment. The public consultation hasn't been launched, Iain, but you could already say what you want to see in it. I mean, what more can be done? What could we talk about? Maybe training for medical professionals? Where are the gaps in the research? What specifics do you need?
First of all, I'm so pleased that Dr. Alvarez is taking, first of all, time to join us today and expressing this very exciting series of developments within the Parliament in the coming term. We've made the point, I think, very clearly today that this is utterly vital. It's vital for individuals. It's vital for the workplace economy, in fact. So I see the specifics, Cathy, as almost a series of circles within circles. We can start with the actual workplace. So we would like to see employers engaging with developing the workplace. We'd like to see it ergonomically attractive. It's a little distressing that if you look, for example, at the Essener survey in 2019 as compared with 2014, this is a survey of risks for new and emerging enterprises. And actually, there are fewer companies now investing in facility for people with RMDs now than there were 5 years ago. So we're very happy, Dr. Alvarez, to learn of these new developments. And I can assure you, EULAR will have something to say in the public consultation, as I know, even more importantly, many of our patients have people with RMDs. But
can I just interrupt, Iain? I mean, if you're talking about the need to invest more in the workplace, I'm sure that we've talked about the importance of data and all the rest of it. But I mean, in the current climate where people are really just fighting to keep their head above water, the idea of investing in ergonomic changes might not really go down very well.
Well, I think it's our job to make the argument, Cathy. First of all, you talk about the immediacy of the COVID-related economic crisis, and whilst, of course, that will last for some number of years, when we look at the demographic shift in Europe of the population, this is a several-decade issue that we face. It's not an issue just for the next couple of years. We've got to act now to prevent this RMD crisis really filling our lives in the workplace for many, many years to come. So there's that piece here. The other thing, I think Professor Wu in the previous panel made the point that investing in bringing creative people into the workforce and allowing them to be as productive as possible will benefit employers rather than acting as a deficit. And it's the oldest adage in the world, but investing now for future prosperity now really is the moment.
So sorry, I interrupted you because you were also talking more about the things that you wanted to recommend the Commission might want to do. So you've got the ergonomic changes in the workplace.
And then there's the way in which people can participate within the workplace. We've heard a lot, in fact, from previous speakers about the digital revolution. People can contribute from home, from where is most geographically safe and convenient and sustainable for them. But what about the kind of rotas? What about flexible working? What about taking a contribution over a month or a year instead of over a week? What is a day's work in the new age? Well, of course, a day's work might be measured by its productivity rather than by the number of minutes and hours. It seems like a very last century idea. And so in EULAR, we're hoping that these much more flexible work schedules, teleworking devices will allow people to properly contribute. And Cathy, if I may just to extend there, we see this circle within the circle. Well, what about broadening the impact? We actually see appropriate research into the causes, management and prevention of rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases as a continuum. And so we welcome the EU's recognition that not only a disability policy, a workplace safety policy, but wider healthcare and health research related issues are considered in the round. Each cannot be separated from the other. And I know I'm so encouraged from Dr. Alvarez to hear of this integration that he and his colleagues are seeking. And then finally, as we develop this at the greatest level, what use are effective medicines and effective strategies, effective so-called prognostics, the biomarker, incredible molecular medicine age? What use is that if people can't access it, if people can't afford it, if we can't actually bring these amazing new medicines, these amazing new non-pharmacologic interventions? I really am talking about the breadth of what people with RMDs need. If we can't bring that to the people who most need it, then we're failing, yes, of course, as doctors, but also as a wider society. A little bit of a list for you, Dr. Alvarez. I apologize.
So what do you make of the list then, Yosis? I mean, we're talking about, you know, a more holistic approach and certainly inclusion being an important part.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And well, I have the pleasure to let you know that we are already working in many of the areas that have been raised. For instance, in the digital developments, there are a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities in the new technologies, in the robotization, in artificial intelligence. But we have to be very attentive that these developments are not implying also particular risks for workers or workers in platforms. We know very well that this is evolving very, very fast. So we, with the European agency, with the Bilbao agency, actually, we are working very, very hard with them. In research, there is definitely a lot of invest in research, and under Horizon 2020, the Commission is investing a huge amount of money in researching the causes and the mechanism of these kind of diseases. So I think we have combining all these elements in order to be successful, because we have a lot of knowledge, we have the experience of the previous year, and let me say that in our experience in the member states, they are more and more willing to work in this direction, because this is a matter of transmuting or evolving the prevention culture. It's not only about legislation. Legislation is there, is very important, but it's also about this inclusive culture of prevention. And this is a matter of everyone. It's not only for the Commission, it's not only for governments, it's not only for member states. This is for all the stakeholders, for researchers, for social partners, of course, employers and workers' organizations. It's a matter for ergonomic experts, certainly. And this is our commitment to work very actively with them in order to tackle these very important and challenging disorders.
Thank you. Well, Iain, another part of, I suppose, sort of prevention, but early diagnosis, of course, is the role of the medical practitioner. And we've heard how very important it is to have that early diagnosis. Are there, I mean, does more need to be done here to train medical people?
we can always do more to train both medical and the broader health professional community, Cathy. It's critical for success. I think this is an area, in fact, particularly in the area of early diagnosis and early intervention, that rheumatology as a discipline, that is the discipline that is concerned with looking after people with rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases. We've invested enormous amounts of research and now clinical energy in identifying disease early. EULAR ran the campaign Don't Delay, Connect Today right across Europe, and in fact adopted in large parts of the globe, highlighting the absolutely critical nature of early diagnosis, early intervention, preventing damage to the individual, preventing damage to their joints, but also, really importantly, when we start that early treatment, we prevent some of the wider so-called comorbid deficit that people with RMDs can suffer. We can reduce the burden on the heart, reduce the burden on the mind. We can reduce the burden, in fact, indirectly on the individual and their family, and indirectly, therefore, in the workplace. And so early diagnosis is utterly critical. That, of course, does require education. It requires education of health professionals. It requires education of those in primary care. It probably also requires a broader education within society. I think we have to really make the case that the RMDs are important diseases. They sit alongside diabetes, heart disease, and cancer as absolutely crucial burdens upon society. It's not that those other conditions are not important. Of course they are. I'm a physician. I consider them to be paramount for those afflicted. But so too, I consider the RMDs to be paramount for those afflicted. And so we're looking for parity of recognition. We're looking for that imperative that we as a community of people who either have RMDs or care for those with RMDs wish to see at the very forefront of the agenda.
It was interesting when we heard one of those video clips where there was one young man talking about the invisibility of the disease. I mean, there are other invisible diseases. It's not alone. I know that, but I mean, the whole business of the stigma and trying to encourage this culture of openness. When you hear about people not daring to tell their employer that they have an illness because they feel they may be in some way discriminated against, I mean, that's worrying. And so, you know, can that quickly change, or is that a really rather slow development? What do you think, Iain?
Cultures rarely change very quickly, unfortunately, even those cultures that really should change quickly. I think the fear of the hidden disorder, the fear of being, in a sense, disclosed as someone with an underlying disability, the reason there is the fear to disclose is actually the fear of discrimination. And so this is where I think we wish to work with fellow members of the medical community, with the wider political community, to take away that fear of discrimination. Once removed, that I think would create a much more inclusive culture that truly brings people to the workplace knowing they will be welcome, and more than that, knowing that their creativity, their productivity, their contribution therein will be all the more appreciated by their peers.
Thank you. And yes, in terms of the national contribution to this, I don't mean financial, I mean in terms of approach and versus European. I mean, what more needs to be done at national level then that maybe you could be a guiding force to make happen?
Certainly. In this respect, let's say the philosophy of that, of the thinking behind that, is that the EU can and should set the framework, because actually the challenges are very similar for all member states. So that's why we promoted and we launched, the Commission adopted the EU strategy on occupational safety and health. And we are very pleased to see that virtually all member states have adopted their own national strategies, aligned with this EU strategy, but of course adapted to the particularities of each member state. And that's the spirit, working at EU level, but keeping in mind that on the spot in member states, in workplaces, this has to be implemented. I would like also to refer, I have referred mainly to the
occupational safety and health because it's the area in which I'm working. But we are working, the Commission also very actively in preparing a new European disability strategy for the future. Starting in 2000, there is a current strategy on disability, and our colleagues dealing with that are very, very actively working in preparing the next one, which is will be mainly focused in implementing the, let's say, the disability rights in the context of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And this is part of the overall picture. This is part of the inclusive approach being done at EU level in order to improve the lives, the lives of the citizens and the workers.
Well, I'm sure that I mean, obviously, the disability strategy is at the centre of everybody's minds on this one. So people will be monitoring it, and I think you will be lobbied hard on that one. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, Jesus Alvarez in Luxembourg. Thank you for joining our discussion. So Iain, just stay with me now for just to sum up, if you like, just to tell you that we've now got nearly 1,300 people watching on YouTube, so it's great. So you see, there are advantages of doing it this way. I mean, you know, if we'd been in a hotel in Brussels, there would not have been so many people able to join in and listen to the conversation. So, you know, pluses and minuses. So Iain, tell me, just to sum up, overall, are you heartened by the discussions? I mean, we've heard from the European Parliament and from the European Commission. Both of our speakers seem to be suggesting that this is something that really has to have a greater platform in the future.
I'm enormously heartened by this discussion, Cathy, particularly when it is reaching out to so many people through the digital medium. This, I guess, is our new future. And I can't think of a stronger message that we as a community of health professionals, remembering that EULAR is a three-pillar organization: health professionals, physicians, and patients at the very center, PARE, the patients at the very center of all that we do. And I think the message we convey to the world today is very, very clear indeed. World Arthritis Day, time to think really carefully about what it is that we can do as a community. We've very little to celebrate in the immediacy of the healthcare environment amidst a COVID pandemic, Cathy. It would be easy to think of these as dark days, and indeed they are. But look at the opportunities that are emerging. Look at the development of digital and telemedicine, telehealth, and teleworking. Look at the opportunities people, and I have to say, people with RMDs, I think, would much rather talk about the EU ability agenda rather than disability agenda. I think something that came through, I heard very clearly in the videos and the panel today, was people talking about their ability to contribute. And that is the inclusive culture that we in EULAR are so very keen to prosper, so very keen to support. And, you know, the other thing we're seeing in the COVID pandemic is the power of modern molecular medicine, digital health, and collective responses that we can make as a community, as a health community, in the pharma industry, in setting social policies and setting public health policy. I think it's important to remember that rheumatology as a discipline has been at the very forefront of the molecular medicine revolution in the last 1 or 2 decades. We are not an antiquated medical backwater. In fact, rheumatology is at the very fore of using modern molecular technology to change lives. And I think as we do come through this COVID pandemic, and we will, and we have learned the really crucial lessons that we are being taught by this virus and by its extraordinary and dreadful consequences, we will come through as a community very much stronger. And as ever, no surprise, I'm very optimistic that it will be people with rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases who will benefit from that development and new lessons learned.
Well, I think on that note, Iain, we can wrap up now, and I think you've coined the name for the new strategy. So it's got to be the EU ability strategy, not disability. So that can be the first lobbying point, and I'm sure that everybody is getting very ready to lobby the Commission on many issues that have been raised today. But it's been an interesting discussion, and thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving your insight and your expertise. And thank you to all of our speakers, in fact. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you all for watching, so many of you on YouTube. Of course, it will be available to watch again, or for anybody who's missed it. We want to keep the conversation going, so please do keep tweeting. It's hashtag EULAR 2020 forum, and yeah, keep the conversation going. But for now, from all of us here, goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
RMDs are the biggest cause of work loss in Europe. EULAR is utterly committed to influencing the policy that shapes the lives of people with rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases. Now, the consequences of chronic disease, and especially the rheumatic musculoskeletal diseases, are utterly debilitating. And I hope you, like me, will feel that inclusion of people so affected is absolutely vital for society. So please join myself and EULAR on YouTube to help us work together to fight against these terrible and debilitating disorders.
When I was diagnosed, I didn't know what it meant having a chronic disease. I didn't have any information about lupus, and I didn't know what to do. Basically, I felt like my life ended. It took me a long time to get back to real life, to my friends, even to open up with my family. The most difficult part for me actually was when I was away at home sick and somebody had to step in and substitute me at work. That was the most difficult part for me. I suppose it's for everybody. You don't want to tell people that you are not feeling yourself or you are not feeling 100% because you are responsible for your job. However, sometimes you are just not able to hide it.
Very often I feel stressed in my working environment because I feel the urge of hiding my pain in order not to leave things behind in my work.
The biggest obstacles that I had was actually the timing and the strict time schedule that I needed to be in school. I was a teacher at that time, and of course I had my personal schedule, and in the mornings, for instance, I had some difficult times, or in the afternoon when I had less energy, it was really difficult for me to be there at those specific times. It would have been nice to have some flexibility.
The biggest obstacle that I have faced at my workplace is the accessibility issues. And I must say that I still strive for many things in order to have a fully accessible workplace environment. But the problem facing at my work is that sometimes they don't invest. And sometimes also is the regulations in the government that it's not so easy to invest in such things. And this is one of the problems that we face. Maybe they understanding the problems, maybe they understanding the obstacles that I face with my condition, but they don't reflect this in the investment of improvement of the workplace accessibility.
And we mustn't forget that health professionals are also human, and many of us also live with long-term diseases. And that also means that there has been extra challenges, discussions, and risks and stress that many health professionals have met during this time.
One of the biggest obstacles that I've faced is the invisible nature of my RMD. Because you can't necessarily see the symptoms, you can't see the pain that I go through and all the other symptoms that I experience, that can often be really difficult for employers and colleagues to understand. The variable nature of the condition, one day I could be great, the next day I could be laid up in bed. People like me try and persevere through our symptoms to try and prove our worth, and that can be quite difficult for us and for also other people to understand.
I think that it's certainly made clear that working is not the same for every person, and that some people, especially people with chronic conditions, may have specific problems when they must be present at the workplace or commute to and from work. It should also be considered that when they work from home, they may need specific adaptations to their working environment, which must be discussed with the employer. Current pandemic made it clear that not every employee can be treated in the same way, and that some employees with a chronic condition like an RMD may need specific attention.
The people bring additional value to the workplace, and maybe they're even more responsible in fulfilling their tasks.
When I'm not feeling well and have a bad day, which is very common for people with RMDs, for example, when I have brain fog or fatigue, I just ask my employer if it's possible to work from home, and he's fine with that.
No condition should be a barrier for people being able to achieve what they want to achieve, and that's certainly something which I've pushed for. But ultimately, we need to make universities, other education providers and employers accountable. And I really feel strongly that we shouldn't be making people with health conditions, people with RMDs, fit into an ableist-driven world. Why should people with health conditions have to fit in with the world that's been designed by people who are able-bodied and healthy? You know, work and education should be accessible to everybody, and that's something that we all need to push together. The pandemic has shed some light on just an insight into what it's like to live with an RMD, the isolation, the anxiety. Those are things which we all live with, people with RMDs live with. I think the wider society has been able to get a glimpse into that.
To be able to work, it means the most for me, because I feel fully integrated and member of the society. And it's one of the most important, I think, pillar of the good quality of life, and gives me satisfaction and self-esteem. And of course, also support my psychological status, which is a very positive or has a very positive effect to the good prognosis of my disease.
I think that people with rheumatic diseases constitute a very important proportion of the workforce, and it's very important to keep them working. And so I think that having attention for the specific challenges they face could be very helpful. Working is not only important from the societal perspective, and the financial and economic point of view, but also for people, their self-esteem, your overall quality of life. Working is an essential element of the lives of people. So it must by all means be avoided that they lose their job, especially in these times.